What's up guys, JP back at you once again. Very excited to be bringing you guys video number 4 of 12 in my 12-part series chronicling every single movie that I watched in the year 2020. I hope you guys are enjoying the series. If you missed the first 3 parts, be sure to check them out. So moving on to April, we have a big month here. We watched 63 total movies during the month of April, which is pretty insane. There was one particular week where I went above and beyond and probably watched the most movies I've ever watched in a single week. I watched 21 movies in 1 week during 1 week of April here. Everything was closed down. There just really wasn't much to do, so I kicked back and watched movies. Now, I did take a bit of a break later on in the month, so my numbers would have even been more insane had I kept going that strong. I was kind of movied out by the end of April. As usual, I will be using the letterboxed rating system of 5 stars every time I rate one of these films. It's just simpler that way. So with that said, let's jump into April and let's talk about every single movie I watched in April. First up, continuing with the dive into 1985, we have Terror on Tape. This film I actually wasn't even able to log on Letterboxd. It's a compilation film. It's not really a movie, but it does have original scenes in it. It's basically a compilation of a bunch of different movies. One that I remember standing out was The Deadly Spawn. You see a few clips from that film, which is such a fantastic, fun movie, but it's intertwined between movie clips and then a video store clerk, and there's that thing sort of going on, sort of like a wraparound in an anthology. It was fun to watch, but it's really just video clips. I just gave it a 2.5 out of 5. Then I watched Hellhole from the year 1985. I think this was like a women in prison type deal, or a woman held captive against her will. I don't really remember a ton about it. By this point, it was a long time ago, and also I watched so many movies during the month of April that I don't even remember half the stuff I watched, but I think it was pretty decent. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Then we have She's Allergic to Cats from the year 2016. This film just got its wide release this past year in 2020, and it was pretty garbage in my opinion. I thought the premise sounded decent, but the movie didn't deliver at all. I found myself mostly bored and uninterested. I gave it a 1.5 out of 5. Pretty low rating. Then me and my homie Carly got together and we did a movie marathon. We actually filmed a video for it. It is available on our His and Hers YouTube channel. We basically got a bunch of food and a bunch of movies together and randomly picked movies from my collection and just watched a few things. I think we ended up doing 6 or 7 titles. The first random movie we got was A Good Marriage. From the year 2014, this was a Stephen King film. I had read the original source material novella story compilation Full Dark No Stars, and it was a pretty good story. It wasn't the best in there, but most of those stories have been adapted now into feature films, which is pretty cool because it was a nice little compilation. It's about a woman who begins to expect that her husband is actually a rapist slash murderer. I thought the adaptation was pretty decent. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Then we drew Paranormal Entity from the year 2009, and this is a film from the Asylum, which was a company known for producing mockbusters like I Am Omega and Transmorphers instead of Transformers and I Am Legend. When Paranormal Activity was really big, they put out a film called Paranormal Entity. It's sort of its own unique story. It's not a complete ripoff, but it is about a group of people who are filming events in their house at night and things like that. This is actually probably one of the best Asylum films ever made. A lot of people think this one is better than Paranormal Activity. I'm not quite in that camp, but I do think that it's a really decent Asylum film, and it's a decent found footage film. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. The next one up was Star Time from the year 1992. I had this on Vinegar Syndrome and decided to check it out. It's basically about a serial killer who is talking or communicating with another person, like his conscience or something. I can't really remember. I do remember I liked it though. It was sort of this 90s serial killer film that was pretty good. I gave that a 3 out of 5. Then we randomly picked Night of the Living Dorks from the year 2004. This is a comedy film from like Germany or something like that. A bunch of loser nerd dudes are doing a science project, crash their van, and the project basically brings them back to life and they are zombies. It's actually pretty fun. I've always sort of liked this one. I hadn't seen it in a really long time, but I remember the trailer for this film playing on tons of videos that I rented, and I always wanted to see it. I remember there's a scene where the dude's testicle falls off and he's like chasing around the room and stuff like that, and it always just seemed really funny to me, so I always wanted to see it. But I think it's pretty good. I do think it's a decent movie. I gave that a 3 out of 5. Then we randomly picked Growth from the year 2010. Now the cover of this one appealed to me. I bought it at Walmart years and years and years ago, probably around 2010, and the cover was just really cool. It seemed like it would be a gross out horror film, but I've always avoided it because I never really heard anybody say anything good about it, probably for good reason, because it really wasn't that good. There was like maybe a cool squeamish, there's maybe a few cool squeamish scenes, but that's about it. I gave it a 2 out of 5. Final film that came up in the randomizer for our horror marathon with Carly was 9 Lives from the year 2002. Now, I purposely avoided this film back when I was prepping for a top 10 of 2002 just because it looked really bad, and it stars, or at least has, Paris Hilton in it. It really wasn't very good, but I didn't hate it either. I expected more of a slasher out of it, and it sort of wasn't that. I just gave it an average rating of 2.5 out of 5. Then I decided to continue with some Mad Max films. I watched Mad Max 2 from the year 1981, aka The Road Warrior. This is a phenomenal movie. I mean, it's absolutely insane. Some of the car scenes in there, the chases, it's just mind-blowing. Awesome practical effects, crashes, carnage, twisted steel, twisted metal. Mel Gibson is great as Mad Max. It is the definitive Mad Max film. Love the post-apocalyptic desert environment with the high-speed car chases. Just phenomenal. I give it a 4 out of 5. Honestly, I feel like it should be a 5 though, now that I'm just praised it so much. Then we have Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome from the year 1985. And yeah, this is the Mad Max film that I was familiar with. I grew up with this one. This one used to air on Monster Vision. I seen Mad Max 2 a little bit later, but Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome was the one that I was most familiar with. But I hadn't seen it in a really long time. I was very interested to see if it would hold up. It held up, and I also noticed some flaws that I probably didn't notice when I was a kid. It's not as good. The Thunderdome stuff is really fun and cool. There's some issues with it though. I still think it's a pretty fun Mad Max film, and I actually enjoy it much more than the original Mad Max, but I just gave it a 3 out of 5. Then I checked out Death Wish 3 from the year 1985, and yeah, it's another solid Death Wish film. Charlie Bronson pissed off, killing some scum of the city. And yeah, it's good stuff, man. I liked all 3 of the Death Wish films that I've seen. I give it a 4 out of 5. Then we have Savage Island from the year 1985. I don't remember a damn thing about this movie. Sounds like a jungle movie. Maybe it was the one with Linda Blair in it for like a second. Let me check on that. So according to my Letterboxd review, this was the one that had Linda Blair in it at the beginning. It was pretty bad. Some women in prison working in a mine, and then just bad. 1 out of 5. And then we have The Boys Next Door from the year 1985. Now, when I first seen the cover of this film, I was like, is this some sort of like gay porn or something like that? They emphasized the guys without the shirt on type thing. That was my first thought, but no, that's not what this is. Severin Films actually put this out, and it's basically 2 youths who are kind of pissed off and wreak carnage on a town. That sounds cooler than it actually is. Like, they don't do that much, but it was pretty good. Charlie Sheen's in it. I think if the violence and mayhem was amped up a little bit, this would probably be held as sort of a little bit of a classic. But it's a little tamer than you would probably like. It's almost more in the thriller vein than horror, but I thought it was a pretty solid movie. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Then we have Under the Skin from the year 2013, starring Scarlett Johansson. There's some interesting sci-fi elements to this film. We have Scarlett Johansson sort of seducing these men and like taking them into this otherworldly type of pool, black room type thing. It's really cool. It was a pretty neat movie. I give it a 4 out of 5. Then we have Evils of the Night from the year 1985. And this one was actually pretty solid. It's like this alien type movie, but Neville Brand's in it, of course, from Eaten Alive fame. And man, I wish this guy was in more movies playing that type of character, because he's pretty much playing Neville Brand in Eaten Alive. It's pretty much like the same type of character, but I really enjoyed it. A 3.5 out of 5. Then we have Hunter's Moon from the year 2020. This was a bad werewolf film. It was really weak, predictable, ridiculous. Didn't really enjoy it. 1.5 out of 5. Then we have The Bride from the year 1985. I don't remember a ton about this one. I think this was like a Bride of Frankenstein type of thing. It was okay. I feel like it was really long. It was like 2 hours long or something. I gave it a 3 out of 5. Then we have Fortress from the year 1985, which is a good old Ozploitation type movie. And yeah, it follows a teacher who's on the run from these masked criminals, and she has her class, and they're out in the outback and in a cave and stuff like that, and they're trying to survive. Really solid movie. I believe it was it was made in Australia and got released, and then I think they put it on HBO here in America. I hadn't really heard many people talk about this one, but it was really decent. I gave it a 4 out of 5. Then we have Amazonia, the Catherine Miles story from the year 1985. I can't remember anything about this one. I assume it was some sort of jungle prison movie. I remember watching a couple of those in the past year or two. It was probably one of those. I rated it a 3 out of 5, so it must have been half decent. Then I watched Blackout from the year 1985. This was a TV film. I believe it was done for HBO. Sort of more of a thriller, but very good. I definitely recommend checking it out. I don't think it's on disc, but I think I watched it on YouTube. 4 out of 5. Then I watched Rapture from the year 1980. This is an art house film. I want to say that it was from Spain or a country like that. I can't really remember, but it's sort of this drug-induced art film with these homosexual undertones and stuff like that. It was pretty interesting and good to sort of make sense of what was happening and understanding the film. It was a decent movie. Definitely something. I don't even know. Criterion may have put this out. If not, I could totally see them putting this out. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Then we have The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari from the year 1920. This is a silent film, German expressionist film, and I'd known about it for years. I'd seen clips, I'd seen reviews, but I never actually watched it. And sitting down and watching The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and I was kind of blown away. It is a phenomenal movie, and not just for the 1920s. It holds up. It's good for today. If you have never seen it, check it out. The story is actually good, which sometimes in the 20s you didn't really necessarily have these great stories, but this is a good story, and the visuals are just phenomenal. I mean, that's what it's known for, but they are really good. 5 out of 5. Then we have Document of the Dead from the year 1985. This is a little bit of a documentary on Romero and his Dead films. There's been many versions of this film. I'm not sure exactly what version I had. I had like a Synapse DVD, but there's a couple of extended versions, and it's been released with more footage throughout the years and stuff like that. But it's good stuff, man. I mean, it's behind the scenes. It's talking about the films. In fact, yeah, I know it was later because they talk about at least Diary of the Dead and maybe even Survival of the Dead in it. I'm not sure. So definitely a later version of the film. But yeah, it's good. 4 out of 5. Then I watched Return of the Living Dead from the year 1985. Just an all-time absolute classic. One of my favorite horror films ever. It's in my top 5. It's a film I could throw on and watch many times, and usually I do watch it a couple of times a year because it's just that damn good. Love all the characters, love the setup, so good, dude. Linnea Quigley, awesome in it. I mean, that graveyard scene is stuff of legend in the horror community. It's just one of the best horror films ever made. 5 out of 5. Then we got Silent Witness from the year 1985. This was a TV movie, I believe for NBC or CBS, one of those local networks. It was actually filmed and takes place in Pittsburgh, which is my neck of the woods. And this is based on a true story that I do remember hearing about on, I want to say like a Forensic Files type show or something. I know it was notable because it was around me, or one of those like true crime shows. It probably wasn't Forensic Files, but it was one of those things. And it follows a woman and her husband who witness a rape committed by the brother slash brother-in-law, the brother of the husband, and they don't know if they should come forward and ruin the family. And it's just kind of insane how far we've come from that, because you're sitting there looking at the screen and you're like, clearly you turned this guy in. But back then, and maybe even still today, I guess there's more involved in the dilemma, but it felt very much like, yeah, turn this scumbag in. So it was definitely interesting to see that. I'd seen this movie before on like the Lifetime channel a long time ago, but yeah, I thought it was a pretty decent movie, and it really kind of puts things in perspective. So I gave it a 3 out of 5. Then I watched Beyond the Mat from the year 1999. This is a pro wrestling documentary. It's a peek behind the curtain at a time where I don't think you got as many peeks behind the business that you do now. Now it's like kind of common knowledge and everybody pretty much knows how it works and stuff. Yeah, I mean, this was around the time that I was a fan. I would say that I was really into wrestling from the age of like 3 or 4 up until probably 2000, 2001-ish. And then I kind of completely stopped watching it or paying attention to it, besides here and there. But yeah, it was cool. Then I watched Cat's Eye from the year 1985, and this is one of my favorite anthology films. I like all the stories in it. You have Quitters Inc., which is probably my favorite story. It's about this guy who tries to quit smoking and enlists the help of this weird company, and they take it a little bit far in how they try to get you to stop smoking. And then The Ledge, this man stuck out on a ledge of this skyscraper, and that one's anxiety inducing. And then the last one was about a troll that like steals your soul essence by like sucking your breath when you're sleeping. That one's cool too. Stars a young Drew Barrymore, but it's just a great fun anthology film. I've always liked it. It's always one that I've always went back to and sort of revisit every few years. Really enjoy it. 4 out of 5. Then we have another one of my top 5 favorite horror films. We have Day of the Dead. This is a absolute phenomenal film. I think it's George's best of the Dead series. I know there's some Night of the Living Dead marks out there and some Dawn of the Dead fanatics, but Day of the Dead is where it's at for me. I love the dynamic between the military and the scientists, and the zombies look phenomenal. I think it's Tom Savini's best work in his entire career is put on display in Day of the Dead. Love the setting. Just a great movie. 5 out of 5, obviously. Then I watched Demon Within from the year 1985. This was a short little Japanese horror film with a little monster in it. I thought it was pretty cool, man. I don't think this is on disc anywhere, but if it was, I would definitely pick it up. It's a small, simple, effective little horror film, and it was a little bit of a gem from 1985 while doing the prep for my top 10 of 1985. It was one that stood out. 3.5 out of 5. Next we have Come and See from the year 1985. This is a film from Belarus, and I believe Criterion put this out on Blu-ray. But it's a war film. It follows a kid in a village that is invaded by the German forces, and it's pretty messed up. It definitely shows the horrors and the atrocities of war. There was a few points in this film where I felt a little sick to my stomach. Just gritty and raw, uncomfortable to watch. The lead looks like he aged 10 years by the end of this film. Pretty powerful, great movie. 4.5 out of 5. Then we have Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning, from the year 1985, and yeah, this is in my top 3 favorite Friday the 13th films. I go Part 5, Part 2, Part 4 as my favorites. I think this one has some of the best characters. You have Demon, ooh baby, love that. Reggie the Reckless, you scared of spiders on a string? That was a bad Reggie the Reckless impersonation, but you get my point. Junior, you tell him, Ma. Ethel, would you shut the up? You know, it's just great. It got great characters. What can I say? Good kills. Of course, nudity. Debbie Sue Voorhees, and probably one of the, if not the best nude scene in Friday the 13th history. Love it. 4 out of 5. Then we have the Nail Gun Massacre from the year 1985, and yeah, this is a pretty decent little slasher. It kind of surprised me a little bit. I didn't expect it to be as good as it was. I expected it to be like this cheap, crappy mess, but it's definitely better. A 3 out of 5. Then we have Hot Love from the year 1985, directed by Jorg Bergereit. And this is the guy who brought us Necromantic and Necromantic 2 and Shram and Der Todsking. Yeah, this was a short film by him. I don't really remember it. I thought it was kind of weak though. I gave it a 2 out of 5. Then we have The Stuff from the year 1985. I think I watched this one with the Joe Bob presentation, Last Drive-In presentation. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I definitely liked it more this time watching it than I did the first time. I mean, obviously it's about consumerism and all that, and it's cool. It got cool commentary and stuff like that, but I expected a little bit more of maybe like a movie like The Blob or something. It's really not that, but The Stuff is cool, and it's mysterious, and it's kind of an interesting concept. It honestly could be a pretty interesting idea for a remake. A 3.5 out of 5. Then we have Puppet Master The Littlest Reich from the year 2018. I watched this on 4K, which is just insane to me that there's a Puppet Master film on 4K. And why not put the best Puppet Master film on 4K? Puppet Master The Littlest Reich is definitely, in my opinion, the best Puppet Master film, if not the second best. It would be Puppet Master 3 that would be the best, but I think this one's probably better. It's just gory, insane. There's tons of puppets. It's unapologetically violent and crude. It's just awesome. The story is very paper thin, which maybe is why you could say that Puppet Master 3 might be a little bit better. But either way, those two are the best two Puppet Masters. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Next up is House from the year 1985. This is a favorite of mine, a childhood favorite. I believe this did end up making my top 10 of 1985. I absolutely love this movie. The haunted house genre is one that's good, but sometimes missed for me. It doesn't really get me excited, but this one blends the horror and comedy so well. Great practical effects in there, great comedy, and it's actually pretty scary. I remember as a kid, the scene where he bends down beneath the table and he pops back up and his wife turned into this hideous monster always was a great jump scare for me. I love the mythology and sort of the world building of this like interdimensional house thing that's going on. The Vietnam stuff is good. It's just a very good horror movie. I give it a 4 out of 5. Next up we have Silver Bullet from the year 1985. This is one that I did not grow up with, and honestly at one point I wasn't even that big of a fan of it when I first seen it, which was back in like 2013, but I've seen it a few times since and it definitely impressed me over time, and it actually did make my top 10 of 1985. It's such a great werewolf film, really. I like the narration by the sister. I like the sort of like mystery of it and eventually finding out who the werewolf is. Corey Haim is fantastic in this movie. Gary Busey might even be better. That's another 4 out of 5. Then we have another film that made my top 10 of 1985, and that is A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. And this movie, I always really liked it growing up, and it wasn't until I got into the horror community that I realized that it wasn't really liked or loved. It was kind of hated a little bit, but over the past decade or so, I feel like people really came around on it. Freddy's Revenge, the things that I like about it, I didn't really notice the homoerotic undertones when I was a kid. I mean, maybe the scene with the gym teacher was a little weird to me, but for the most part, I didn't pick up on any of that, honestly, for a very long time, until I heard other people talk about it. And then I was like, yeah, I totally can kind of see that now. For the longest time, I didn't think it was intentional at all, but after seeing that Scream Queen documentary, I definitely think that it was more intentions than I ever considered. Freddy is really dark in this one. I like the story. It isn't the same as the other Nightmare on Elm Streets, and I get it that like it kind of breaks the rules, but at this time the rules weren't really established for sequels, and if we never got 3, 4, 5, 6, we wouldn't really have rules to base it on, because it's a continuation, it's a different story. It's about Freddy trying to get back to the real world, but I love how dark it is, and I think that that is sort of lacking in the later sequels. So very good, solid, love Freddy's Revenge. I give that one a 4 out of 5. Next up, we have the Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation from the year 1995. I decided to pop in my Scream Factory edition of this film. I made a video years ago called A Tale of Two Cuts, and it was a pretty successful video, got a lot more traction than I expected. And it was a video talking about how there was a few different versions of the fourth Texas Chainsaw Massacre film, and some of them had certain run times and others had a different run time, because there was a uncut version that was released in Canada. No matter what version I got, whether it said the longer or the shorter runtime, they were still the same version. They were the cut version, until a friend of mine, Dylan, actually sent me a copy of the uncut version on DVD. Anyway, that doesn't matter anymore, because Scream Factory released the uncut version. Now, the uncut version really doesn't add much to the film. It doesn't save it, that's for damn sure. All it is some character development with the Renee Zellweger character, a little backstory on her. It does add something to the film, but the film is still, you know, a pile of crap. I enjoy watching it though. I think it's a bad movie. I think that it's the worst in the Chainsaw franchise, which is a favorite franchise of mine, but I still enjoy watching it. So even though I think it's bad, it's sort of one of those so bad it's good, and I go back and forth on it. Sometimes I like can't stand it, and other times like I enjoy it. And lately, over the past couple years, I've really learned to sort of enjoy it. I gave that a 1.5 out of 5. It's still a bad movie. Then I watched The Peanut Butter Solution from the year 1985. This is sort of a kids film. I believe it was released under 7 Kids. It's weird, that's for sure, but it's good too. 3.5 out of 5 for The Peanut Butter Solution. Then we have Phenomena from the year 1985. I believe I watched the Creepers version, which is the American version. It's sort of a streamlined version. There's a few different versions of Dario Argento's Phenomena, and there's one version, it's a little bit, it's not the longest version, it's the shorter version. I think that's the best one. It has everything that the longer version has, but it's just streamlined a little bit. I think that's the best version. But yeah, it's a great movie. Another film that made my top 10 in 1985. If you're curious on that, check out the podcast we did on it. Even though I spoiled like most of my list. But yeah, Phenomena is one of my favorite Argentos. Top 5 for me. 4 out of 5. Then we have Reanimator from the year 1985. I believe I watched it earlier in the year too. It's a movie that has grown on me tremendously. I thought it was just okay when I first seen it, but it is really good, and it's funny. It got some creepy, weird stuff going on. Jeffrey Combs is awesome in it. It's a good film. I give that one a 4 out of 5. And that was it for my prep of 1985. I watched a ton of 1985 movies, as I usually do anytime we pull a retro year for a top 10 list. After that, I watched Porno from the year 2019, getting its wide release in 2020. A bunch of religious kids work in a movie theater. It was It was decent. I didn't think it was great or anything, but it's set in the 90s. Didn't really feel like it. But I had fun with it. 3.5 out of 5. Then we get into the beginning of my prep for the next retro top 10 year, and we pulled 1991, which just so happened to be the year that I was born. So for the rest of the year, you guys are going to see a lot of 1991 films come up. And the very first one that I watched was Whatever Happened to Baby Jane from the year 1991. You're probably asking yourself, wait a minute, that didn't come out in 1991. But there actually was a TV remake that came out in 1991. A little disclaimer, I've never actually seen the original Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, but I've heard really good things. And I watched this remake and actually really enjoyed it. It was a contender for my list for a really long time, because I thought it was just really good. And it could be one of those situations where the source material is so good that it just translates well into a remake. I thought the lead performances were really solid, very crazy, creepy. I dug it. I gave that a 4 out of 5. Then I watched Where Evil Lies from the year 1991. This was a trauma anthology film. I don't think they produced it. I think they just released it. I don't really remember a lot about it. I just remember it wasn't very good. There was a vampire story that was okay. But yeah, it was pretty weak. That's a 2 out of 5. Then we had a podcast coming up for 22 Shots featuring the Omen films. And I started prep with that by watching the original Omen from the year 1976. This actually was, I think, like my number 2 or 3 film from 1976 when we did that show. It's a film I didn't grow up with. I actually owned all the Omen films on VHS as a kid and never watched them, which is pretty rare for me to own a horror film and never watch it, but they just didn't seem interesting to me. And honestly, if I had watched it when I was a kid, I probably wouldn't have cared for it too much. These are sort of like adult horror films. Like, I feel like as a kid I just wouldn't have been able to pay attention, but as an adult they're pretty phenomenal, especially the first one. It is great. It is a all-time classic. Absolutely love the original Omen, and that is a 5 out of 5. Then I watched The Runestone from 1991. It was like a creature feature or something. I don't really remember it, but I liked it. 3 out of 5. Then I watched Dead Space from the year 1991. This was a Roger Corman production. It was basically an Alien ripoff. It was pretty cool. 3 out of 5. Then on to Damien the Omen 2 from the year 1978. I think this is a really good follow-up to The Omen. I really like what they do with the Damien character here, where he sort of learns who he is and his sort of reaction to that. Really cool, awesome Omen film. 4.5 out of 5. Then I watched Omen 3, The Final Conflict from the year 1981. And yeah, this is a pretty solid follow-up to the first 2 Omen films. And the only thing that I probably didn't love about it was I wanted to see a bigger final, and it kind of lets you down on that front, but I love the progression of the Damien character. That's a 4 out of 5. Then I watched The Omen 4, The Awakening from the year 1991. And I was actually surprised that this one had some continuity and stuff. It was a TV film. I actually really thought it was pretty decent. I liked it. I gave that one a 3.5 out of 5. Then I watched one of those Lifetime thriller type movies. This one from 1991 called Violation of Trust. It stars Katie Sagal, and I actually thought this one was pretty good. It follows a girl who's kind of wrapped up in a murder plot in her high school involving the death of a classmate. I think that it got pretty dark and creepy at the end, really went in a place that I didn't expect. I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4 out of 5. Then I watched The Omen from 2006. Honestly, I couldn't stand this movie. It was basically just The Omen, but not done as good. If there's one thing of note that I remember about this film, it was that it came out on June 6th of 2006, and I remember it being like kind of a big deal when I was a kid. And yeah, it's just The Omen, but not as good. And I really was annoyed by it. This is a case where the source material did not translate into a good remake. 2 out of 5. Then we have, I'm gonna mess up this title, Murder in New Hampshire The Pamela Wujas Smart Story from the year 1991. This is another one of those Lifetime thrillers. I'd seen this one before as a kid, I think, and I was familiar with the story. I think there actually is an episode of Forensic Files or another one of those true crime shows based on this story, because I was familiar with it. Basically, it's about this teacher that starts banging this 15-year-old and convinces him to kill her husband. Pretty twisted stuff. Interesting story. It's pretty accurate to the real life case. 3.5 out of 5. I actually really enjoy these Lifetime thrillers. Then I watched We Summon the Darkness from the year 2019, getting its wide release in 2020. I actually really liked this movie, sort of a satanic panic type movie. It was enjoyable. 3.5 out of 5. Then we have Chopping Mall from the year 1986. I watched this with the Joe Bob Briggs Last Drive-In presentation, and yeah, it's killer robots in a mall. It's grown on me a lot over the years. Joe Bob had a couple of guests on, and they really talked about the movie. It's Jim Wynorski directed film, and it was really fun to hear what they had to say about it. It was a good Last Drive-In. 3.5 out of 5. Then I watched Witches in the Woods from the year 2019, wide release in 2020. This movie, it started out good, a bunch of kids stuck in the snow and stuff like that. I like movies like that, but it really fell apart and wasn't really that good. I gave it a 2.5 out of 5. Then we have Children of the Night from the year 1991. This is a vampire movie, direct-to-video stuff. It was pretty solid. I gave it a 3 out of 5. Then we have Alligator 2, The Mutation from the year 1991. Now this is one that I used to watch all the time as a kid, but honestly haven't seen it in probably 15, 20 years, like insanely long. And I love the first Alligator. I thought I loved Alligator 2. It definitely doesn't hold up. It's not as good as I remembered it being. Not as much alligator action as I had hoped, but I still found it enjoyable. I gave it a 3 out of 5. Then we have Killer Nerd from the year 1991, a trauma flick. It's not very good, but I did find it kind of funny at times. I gave it 1.5 out of 5. Then on 22 Shots, we were doing the 2 American Psycho films, so I watched American Psycho from the year 2000. This is one that I famously said was overrated, but watching it this time, I definitely get the movie a lot more. It's super well done. I love the commentary in it. Patrick Bateman is a lunatic. I honestly don't know what I was talking about. It's a phenomenal movie. I gave it a 5 out of 5. Then a movie that is not so phenomenal. It's the final film that I watched in April. It is American Psycho 2, All-American Girl from the year 2002. This one stars Mila Kunis, who I love and is very cute in the movie. It's just not very good. I like that it was set on a college campus, I think, if my memory serves me correct, which it usually doesn't. But yeah, just not a good movie, not a good sequel. It's like embarrassing compared to the first one. It could have been good, it just didn't have the writing there. Kind of hard to believe Mila Kunis is the killer too. And I remember there being like some plot issues. 1.5 out of 5. I hope you guys enjoyed my April video here. We watched 63 movies, quite a big April. I know we hit the 60s at least one more time, maybe 2, I can't remember. But if you guys enjoy this series, please let me know. Leave a comment.